播间的同学们非常高兴啊，我们又在直播间见面了。今天我特别荣幸啊，为大家邀请了一位重磅的嘉宾，他就是著名的未来学家凯文·凯利。那凯文·凯利，我相信大家一定都听说过啊。如果没有听说过的话，那你一定是对科技、对互联网不是那么的深入。我记得在1994年的时候，凯文写过一本书，那本书的名字叫《失控》。《失控》这本书到2014年的时候，那20年之后，整整20年之后，传遍了整个全球的互联网，尤其是中国的互联网。他预测对了20年之后发生了很多事情。我今天查了一下 ChatGPT 我就问 ChatGPT 说，Kevin 在这本《失控》这本书里面预测了哪些事情，后来被证明是正确的。那我给大家念念啊，他在这本《失控》里面预测了说，分布式计算和互联网将兴起。同学们，你知道是1994年，1994年中国还没有正式介入互联网，但是呢，他预测了互联网和分布式计算以及今天的 P2P 各种各样的一些分布式的商业逻辑的兴起。开文还预测了人工生命和遗传算法。因为他的很大的研究是关于自然和人工智能之间的关系，所以人工生命，今天你可能很自然就会联想到我们今天所讨论的 ChatGPT 未来的 AI 他预测了无人机和自主的系统。无人机也会在过去的几十年里面也获得了巨大的发展当然还有虚拟现实和仿制技术。那虚拟现实你就不得不提，那最近大家讨论的很多的元宇宙或者说 VR AR 等等，还有生物技术和基因编辑。如果你放在今天来看，你觉得这些东西都已经正在发生，但是呢，这是一本1994年写的书。到2019年的时候呢，我也很有幸去了一趟硅谷，带了20多位企业家去参访了硅谷很多一些知名的企业和投资机构，也专门有幸邀请了 Kevin 给企业家们做了一轮分享。他也提出了未来的12个趋势，以及他那本很著名的书叫《必然》。今天呢，我特别的荣幸有机会把 Kevin 邀请到我们的直播间，在这个特别关键的时刻，就是在 AI 似乎在改变一切的时刻，似乎什么事情都要变了。我们有请这位未来学家谈一谈对未来这个世界的5000天之后的世界的一些看法。所以 Kevin，你能给我们的直播间同学们打个招呼吗？给中国的朋友们。
Hello. I'm really glad to be here. Thank you for taking time to listen to me.
Kevin，我手上有一本你的新书，这本书叫《5000天之后的世界》。这本书是大野和基和您一起合著的一本书我读过您很多的书，我读过《失控》，读过《必然》，读过《技术要什么》。所以这本书到我手上之后呢，我第一时间就把它完整的读了一遍，而且还记了很多很多的笔记，里面有很多特别优秀的一些想法。但是为什么这本书叫《5000天之后的世界》呢？5000天之前跟5000天之后有什么的区别呢？在当下这个人工智能似乎改变一切的这个时代，为什么要谈5000天之后？难道不应该谈5天之后或者50天之后吗？
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think the idea of 5,000 days was that it was a long enough time to actually have change happen, but the number of days were small enough that it indicate that it was actually not that long. And I first noticed the idea of 5,000 days when I was trying to explain how recent and how newborn social media was, that it had not been around for very long. At the time, it had only been around for 5,000 days, which is a number of years, but when you give it the day unit, it really conveys how recent things are. And so I decided to flip that frame of the past 5,000 days and to try to suggest, well, if all this has happened already in the last 5,000 days, what can we imagine in the next 5,000 days? And that 5,000 days was kind of like a convenient amount of time that was small enough for amazing things to happen.
我看这本书里面说5000天之前，再往5000天之前，互联网大概是90年代末的时候诞生的，然后10几年之后，5000天大概是13年多嘛。 出现了社交网络，社交网络到现在算起来也就是5000天之前，所以每13年多似乎有一个非常大的一个变革。那在未来的5000天，我读这本书的时候看到一个今天大家特别关注的词，就是人工智能。我看这本书里面讲到啊，您认为在未来的50年，人工智能会成为和自动化和产业变革、工业变革同等重要的相提并论的影响？这个是个非常厉害的判断啊！它真的有这么重要吗？真的能跟工业革命去相比吗？
Yes, I believe that in many ways, AI is still underhyped, underappreciated. I think the current version of AI that we see today may be overhyped, overappreciated, but the long-term changes, I believe, are at the scale of fire, electricity, even writing. It's very, very, very powerful, but that's going to take a whole century, the entire next century to happen. So this AI revolution that we're seeing is not going to be over in 5,000 days. It's just going to be beginning in 5,000 days. It's just the dawn, the birth of it. It's going to continue for generations because we're going to be constantly remaking these things and their role in our lives. And so yes, I think it is at the same level as some of the great changes that we've seen in our civilization so far.
对，这个听上去很有道理啊。我刚听到一句话，我觉得挺重要的。您认为到目前为止，我们看到这个 AI 啊，大家觉得似乎已经要改变一切的这个 AI，可能被过分的高估了，就当下的 AI 被高估了，但是长远来看呢，这个 AI 其实被低估了，这个可能会颠覆很多人的看法。为什么您认为当下的 AI，您认为 AI 很重要，但为什么当下的 AI 是被高估的？能讲讲它背后的您的判断的原因是什么？
So even though we collectively, pundits, futurists, technologists have been talking about AI for a long time, many people didn't really believe that it was possible. They didn't believe that a machine could be creative. They were taught all through school that machines only did what you told it to do and that they could not be creative. And so when this year suddenly machines could be creative, people assumed then that they were much more smarter than they really are right now. And that's because it turns out that you don't need a lot of intelligence to make creativity. Creativity turns out to be something that's actually fairly easy to replicate in a machine. It's not a difficult problem. There are a lot of problems that are more difficult than making creativity. And so we had always assumed that something like creativity was a very, very difficult thing. You had to have a lot of intelligence and then you could be creative. But it turns out that actually it's a very primitive capability and that you can have creativity even before you have high intelligence. So when creativity came around, people said, oh, this must be like a human. It must be intelligent. It must be all kinds of other things. They were overestimating and overhyping its power. But in fact, it's still very, very primitive. It's doing amazing things, even though it's fairly primitive. It's doing things that are hard for humans to do. And therefore, we kind of want to think that it's like humans, but it's really, really not anywhere near what humans could do. And I would say, maybe in 20 years from now, we would look back, 20 years from now, people will look back and they'll say, oh, no. You didn't have anything like AI then. What you had then was not AI, even though people think that it is really powerful. It is compared to what we have, but not compared to where we're going.
了解。关于创造力这件事儿，确实就是有很多人有一种看法，就是创造力是人独具的。那不仅是创造力，情感、意识，这些都是人类独有的。所以大家不认为机器会有创造力，不认为机器会有情感，不认为机器会有意识。 一旦看到创造力出现，也就是生成式 AI 出现了，觉得我的天哪，它居然可以做出新东西来了，这不得了啊！就觉得这东西要颠覆世界了。但其实这个其实依然是基础的，我们不能高估于它，这是 easy，这是容易的。就是我们以前经常说，创造力是什么？我不知道，跟 Kevin 探讨啊。我们说创造力是旧元素的新组合，是一些旧的东西，永远不可能创造出一件你没有见过的东西。你见过完之后，你造出一匹飞马，能飞的马，是因为你见过马，也见过翅膀。人类是把这个见过的东西组合在一起才有创造力，而这种能力可能恰恰是人工智能最基本的能力，最基础的能力。所以大家不用太高估它，但是呢，绝对不能低估长远，甚至不是未来的5000天，甚至是未来的100年的人工智能对整个人类产生的这个影响。我不知道那个您是不是认同这个观点啊？这个也是很多人并不吵得不可开交的一个大的原因。
Yes, I think you are correct. I think of this as as lowercase creativity with a small c and uppercase creativity, capital C. And the small kind, the minor kind of creativity is, as you suggest, is like a flying horse. You take wings, you take a horse, you combine them. That's a minor kind of creativity. It's fairly easy, expected. The capital creativity, the major creativity, is more like what Picasso was doing, of reinterpreting a face as a cube and trying to see a face in 4 dimensions. That's a major kind of creativity that is very, very difficult for AI to do so far, because what these AIs are trained on is everything that humans have already painted or everything they have already written. It's being trained on what we have already done. And so in a certain way, they can't be more creative than the average human is, because that's what they've been trained on, is the average of all human content. So they can kind of only start with what is in the realm of what humans kind of tend to do. They're just trying to predict what we would do next. And what Picasso did was not predictable. That was a major kind of creativity. And so the AIs right now, today, maybe they'll change in the future, but right now they are unable to do that kind of major creativity, which is thinking of something that is not in the human experience right now today.
但是啊，我特别理解和同意 Kevin 你说的那个小写的创造力和大写的创造力。但是人类这边包括您刚才说的毕加索，他画了一个画，难道他画的画也不都是基于他以前的所有的经验吗？他的所有的那个创造力，极大的创造力，也是基于他这一辈子见过的所有东西，他也没有创造出他见过之外的东西。就人类为什么可以具备一种你说的大型的创造力？
Yeah, I mean, you ask a very good question, which is, what is the source of human major creativity? How are we capable of making up things that don't exist or that we had never been thought of? How did Albert Einstein think of relativity? How do people think of quantum computing? There's no analog in our experience for quantum effects. That's one of the reasons that makes it so hard. Yet we as humans have had major creativity in creating that. And the answer is we don't know. We don't know how we do that. We don't know how human intelligence works. And therefore, the problem of trying to make it artificial is very difficult, because we don't know what intelligence is. We don't know really the source of major creativity. And as we try to make these machines imitate us, they will actually help us begin to understand our own minds, how our own minds work. Okay, and so I think we're going to learn more about our own minds from AI than we ever learned from 100 years of neuroscience and psychology. Okay, so some of the most major breakthroughs in our understanding of our own brain is going to come through trying to make them artificially.
我觉得这也是这个最美好的部分，就人类的真正的创造力，虽然我们并不知道它从哪里来， 不知道它的源头是什么，不知道它的机理是什么。但是呢，这也让我们产生了极大的好奇心，说不定有一天，人工智能可以帮助我们去了解我们自己啊，说不定有一天我们对我们自己的大脑的结构，甚至有更深的一些了解。但是回到 AI 上面，回到人工智能上面，有一句话让我觉得有点看这本书的时候有点担忧啊。您说到对于 AI 的应用，我们没有选择的自由，我们没有选择的自由，AI 似乎必然到来。可是依然有很多人担心说 AI 会给我们这个世界带来很大的一些风险。可是我们真的没有选择用和不用 AI 的自由，我们能不能停下来，就只在今天为止？
There's a lot of criticism of AI because it is the most powerful technology we've ever invented. So therefore, we're pretty sure that the problems that arise from AI will be one among the most powerful problems we've ever had. And there are a lot of people who work with AI. They're very knowledgeable. They've been thinking about it for a long time. They're not stupid, who are concerned about the AI's threat to humanity. And there are many other things to worry about AI in terms of its biases. There's a worry about whether we can believe what it is says is true. For instance, some of the things that you had and led in the beginning with ChatGPT about my predictions were incorrect. Okay, and so those are some real things that we have to worry about. And I think the place where I would suggest maybe to reduce the fear is that I think these things are going to happen a lot slower than maybe we expect. We're seeing a great speed right now, but again, this is still fairly early, fairly primitive. We will have time to adjust, and already people who are developing these are already developing responses and fixes and ways, new technologies to try and overcome some of the problems that AI have. They will certainly have problems, but the solution to those problems is not to have less AI or less technology, but more. And I want to emphasize that the thing about the inevitable part of technology is that, yes, I think it's inevitable that we have AI, but I'm always very clear to emphasize that we have a choice about the character of AI, about who owns it, whether it's commercial or nonprofit, whether it's open or closed, whether it's national or international. Those things we have a lot of choice about. They are not inevitable. And those things matter tremendously to us. We can have two different worlds with two different regimes of AI, one where it's closed and owned by only a few people and maybe nationalized, and other ones where it's open and very much international and very much nonprofit, say. Those are two different worlds, and both of them have the inevitable AI, but they have very different characters, and that's where we have a choice. So the AIs are coming. They're plural. There's more than one of them, but we have a lot of choice in the character of those AIs.
对，我读过您的那本书《Inevitable》，就是必然那本书。在那本书里面，您提到啊，科技其实就像一个生命体一样，它自然会到来，它必然会到来，它有自己需要的东西，它有自己的成长，它有自己的未来。这可能是我们无法主导，我们能够改变的，我们还有很多选择的，是这个即将诞生的、已经诞生的 AI 的这个宝宝，这个孩子，他有什么样的性格，我们应该与之共处的方式是什么？但它的到来是不可避免的。但是刚才抱着所有的尊敬啊，没有任何冒犯的意思。您刚才提到说，您关于 ChatGPT 的预测可能有一些部分是不完全正确的。我在书里面看到这句话，说到您肯断言不存在通用的人工智能。ChatGPT 出来之后，您对这个判断还坚持吗？还是说您有新的看法？
No, I think ChatGPT is a good example of the way in which there really is no such thing as a universal general intelligence. All intelligence, like all organisms, are very, very specific. And we're going to have multiple versions of them. We already have AIs that are very good at image creation, and we have AIs that are very good at chat, and they're not exactly the same. And we're going to have AIs that are very good at music. And the best one for music may not be the best one for images. And so we're going to have many, many, many AIs, and each one of them is going to be engineered for a very specific task. There may be AIs that are sold as being kind of general purpose, but they would be like the general purpose tool in your kitchen or the general purpose tool in your workshop, meaning that they're kind of okay for most jobs, but they're not really the excellent or the best for any job. So they're like a Swiss Army knife. They're like, okay, if you want something to do a lot of jobs, but it's not the best knife, it's not the best scissors. And so most people aren't going to use a general AI. They're going to use the AI that they need for that task or that job or that assignment. And there'll be AIs that will create minds that will be used in science to help us make mathematical proofs. That'll be much, much better at that than the AI that we use for translation. And so that is the future, is multiple AIs, not a single one. There is not a single general purpose one. They'll share some qualities, but just like we have many tools and many machines in our life, we don't just have one machine that does everything. We have many kinds of machines. That's the general trend of technologies. Is the first one is kind of general, and then over time they become more and more specialized, more and more specific.
但是人也是一样您是未来学家，您对未来有非常大的洞见，非常好的洞见。我们是做商业咨询，当然还有人去体育特别强大，有的人会很有表现力，他擅长演讲。每一个人的专长也是不一样的，每一个人都不一样。就像人工智能服务于各个领域，但是它不能说因为我擅长这件事儿，我就不是通用人工智能。那我们每一个人都是，我们其实把人就定义为叫通用人工智能，只不过我专注于某一项能力上去做了优化而已。所以，那从这个意义上来说，是不是您说的在各个领域都有专业的人工智能这件事儿，跟通用人工智能是不是并不矛盾？还是您认为中间还是有巨大的差
别？ Yeah, I don't think there is a universal intelligence. We think that human intelligence is sort of like at the center of this primeval, primitive, foundational kind of intelligence, and that anything really smart has to be like the way we think. But I think when we start to make artificial minds, and maybe if we meet other minds in the galaxy, we would understand that in the space of all possible minds, we'll discover in the coming years that the human mind is not at the center. It's not the general one. It's very, very, very specific. The kinds of thinking that we do, the ability of our tissue brains is really specific to our survival on this planet. And it's not necessarily at the heart of all the other kinds of minds in the world. And so we are biased because we have only seen one kind of intelligence, which is ours. And so we think all other intelligences has to be just like ours. That's a little bit like before Galileo, the astronomers believing that the Earth was at the center and everything revolved around us. Or before Darwin, where we believe that the humans were at the top and that all the other animals were around us. But we understand, of course, that we are just on the tree, off to the side. In the galaxy, we're not at the center. We're at the edge of the galaxy. And we're not at the center of the landscape of all possible minds. We're at the edge. We're very specific. And so when we went to make flying machines, at first they tried to use them flapping, like the only thing we knew how to fly in the biological world, birds or insects, because they flap their wings. But that turned out to be just one tiny, not the universal way to fly. That was a very peculiar way to fly for the animals on this planet. There were other ways to fly, and we started to build things. And so we're going to do the same thing with our AIs, is that we're going to start building other kinds of minds that will not thinking like humans, not thinking like dudes, have a different way of making intelligence. And so we will come to understand that our kind of intelligence is not general. It's very, very specific and particular.
特别有意思的观点啊，就算人工智能最后很像人类的大脑，但是它也不是通用人工智能，因为即便是人类的智力，它的智能也只是一种特殊的类型而已。这个宇宙中有太多各种各样的一些智力的形态，非常有意思。那今天的 AI 它其实是在学习大量的数据，就是你说的是基于人类已知的数据去学习出来的，这个也让我很担心。那这些数据它有的是属于我的，有的是属于你的，有的是属于其他人的。那人工智能如果学习这些数据之后，那个人信息应该如何保护呢？您在书里面说到啊，个人信息价值越高的人将会有越值得拥有一个叫代理人。哎，这个很有意思。什么叫做数据的代理人？意思是说未来我的数据可以通过它发现商业价值。这个是个什么样的构思？会有什么时候会出现这种代理人
？My idea is that we need to share data about ourselves and our lives and our behavior in order to interact in the digital world, because that's all it is. It's just data about us. And so particularly when we begin to have the mirror world or the metaverse or VR, and we actually have avatars that are performing and working inside these in digital environments, the data about our movements and everything else has to be collected. So we have to share the data to have a presence in the digital world. And the question is like, well, how much of the information about us do we want to share? Who do we want to share to? Do we get any benefit from sharing it, whether it's monetary or privilege or whatever? And what I'm suggesting is that right now, we often just sign off and say, yeah, you can do that because it's too much trouble to track, and it's too hard to. But I think with the advent of the AIs now, one of the things that we will do is have an AI bot that works for us individually. So we each have a bot, an AI that will be that we will give our instructions and we'll say, here's the kind of data I'm willing to share. Here's what I expect to get from it. Here's the kind of stuff I don't want to share. And the bot is going to be working with other bots on the commercial side, permitting or sending the data that is what we would like. And so we will have agents working for us to manage our own data, which is needed to live in this digital world. So it's not that they were going to hide from it or keep the data. It's just that we're going to manage it so that we get benefits for it, so that if we get paid for it, whatever it is, or we share it to the right people or not the wrong people. And so that's so complicated that we couldn't do it ourselves, and therefore we didn't do it. But with an AI agent a bot working for us, they will represent us. I just saw just yesterday someone using ChatGPT to make a bot that would manage their finances. And it would do things like go through all their receipts, looking for something that might have been overcharged. They'll go through all their credit cards, go through all their bills, just making sure that everything was okay. And then negotiating, sending letters and sending emails to the company saying, you overcharged me here, you owed it back. And this guy was getting money back because of the incorrect things that his bot, his AI bot, was discovering. So there's a great example of this, but this was working with not just data, but with money. So we could easily imagine a personal data bot managing our data.
这让我想起来，在去年前年的时候啊，非常热的一个话题。当然，现在随着 AI 的火的时候，这个话题稍微有一点淡化下来，叫 Web3。所以，当每一个人的数据都可以被自己拥有，甚至用代理人的方式把它授权给其他人，并且因此获得收益，是不是这是您对Web3的这个形式的一种预测呢？还是您对这个 Web3也有一些自己不一样的看法？我特别想听听您对这个话题的一些意见。
Did you say Web3?
Web3，
So, Web3, my understanding, first of all, Web3 is a big, loose word that can mean many things to people right now. There's really no good definition. There are many crypto blockchain fans that imagine a digital world that's full of crypto and blockchain, and they call that Web3. There's a bunch of people who imagine a way of making a decentralized web and social media where there are no really big corporate owners. It's decentralized, and you control, in a certain sense, your own servers and your little corner of the world, so you can't be kicked off. And that's another vision, and that's it's really more. There's data and ownership is part of the problem, but it's much kind of more complicated and bigger to understand that in terms of sharing protocols, how you police it. I mean, how do you keep the spam out and the malicious hackers out? It's a very, very complicated problem that includes data ownership, but it's more than that. And I have been looking at those Web3 things, and here's what I would say about it is that I wrote a book, my first book, Out of Control, which you mentioned, which is about decentralized systems. And the Web3 is exactly that. It's sort of like, is exactly what Out of Control was talking about, how to make a very decentralized system. And the thing that I emphasized in Out of Control is that there is a cost to doing a system like that, that it's expensive in a certain sense. It's much more efficient to do a system like that centrally controlled. The advantages of a decentralized ownership system is that it's very adaptable. It is maybe much more suitable to human creativity. It can solve some of the problems of tribalism and internationalism and stuff, but there is a real cost to it, which is it's a very inefficient system. It's more expensive in a certain sense to run well. If you lose something, as we know from crypto, it's almost impossible to get it back. So there are lots of inefficiencies in this kind of structure, and it's not clear yet whether people in general, like me, are going to find it worth the extra expense to have a decentralized system. It may be that it's costly in terms of the amount of energy that needs to run it, and the amount of maintenance, and the amount of maybe hassle that the individual has to do, that humans may not choose it, because even though there are some advantages, they don't outweigh the extra cost for it. And nobody's yet proved in making a system that they can make a system where the benefits were more than the drawbacks.
我非常非常同意。就是您提到了一点，就是很多人在讨论 Web3或者说叫分布式系统的时候，看到它的优点，但其实它有一个重大的挑战，就是它是特别大耗成本，耗很多很多的成本。所以分布式的系统，不管是比特币 还是我们说的 Web 3.0，我们都要去评估，说这套系统我们走进了分布式的时候，它所获得的收益是不是真的大于因此带来的更大的相对于中心化的系统更大的成本。但是在您看的这个过去的5000天，再往5000天，您看您从互联网90年代互联网到了社交网络，其实我们通常把这个时代叫做 Web 1.0，它是一个中心化的分发的系统。那新闻的网站，一些我公布了我要做什么事儿，只有少数人可以写内容。到了您说的社交网络这个时代，5000天之前，第二个您说的5000天，它其实就是在很多人口中的叫 Web 2.0。我可以写内容了，我不仅可以看了，我不再是只读了，我可读可写了。但是再往下，零失控里面说的分布式系统，所谓的3.0，我不但可读可写了，我还有拥有权了，包括刚才说的数据，我有拥有权了，可以享受它的收益了。这是一步一步往前的分布式计算的一个进展，但是它的成本依然是一个大问题，需要综合来考虑的。所以在这个大趋势之下，在未来的5000天里面，如果越来越多的数据都这样会集中在平台上面，会不会就像那本书的名字叫失控呢？大平台如果有一天会成为跟政府、跟公益的机构、非利机构和公司一样的存在，在这本书里面啊，我还是向他推荐这本书啊，叫5000天后的世界。这本书里面提到，平台将有可能成为第四种形态，政府、公司和非营利机构的第四种存在。哇，这个听上去也很可怕。但是我们相信您对未来的这个看法，它真的会成为第四种存在吗？如果成为这样了，那我们怎么办呢？
Yes, it's a good question. I do think that the platforms are this new fourth branch of civilization after corporations and government and NGOs. And those are not going to go away, just to be clear. I'm not saying that it's going to replace it. I'm just saying that it's in addition to corporations and governments and NGOs. We're going to have platforms, and they will have a very strong force, and there will be more of them. And so the question that you're asking is there any chance that maybe some of those platforms in the next 5,000 days, could they be something like a Web3, distributed or decentralized? And the answer is, I think there is a chance. Whether or not it's crypto is one version of that. There are other versions that we can imagine that don't rely on crypto, that are decentralized or distributed. And they're just this week, there was a version of Twitter called Blue Sky that was launched that is a distributed, much more distributed version of Twitter, which is Twitter is very centralized. This is a distributed version made by Jack Dorsey, who is also the founder of Twitter. So that does not rely on blockchain. And so so I think it's very possible to see maybe some new platforms that are more distributed than the current ones. And that would be good. That would be good for the world, because I think it can be. They may not be fully distributed, because again, as I was saying before, that there's an expense, and I don't just mean energy expense. There's a computational expense. There's a administration expense. There's all kinds of other expenses, but it's not easy. There's a technical difficulty that you have to overcome to do that. And my bet has been, is that platform might also be in the AR, VR, metaverse, mirror world. That is what I think the next huge new platform. And that still relies on smart glasses. We do not have really good smart glasses yet. We want the iPhone of smart glasses. And right now we have the old bulky cell phones. That's the stage that we're in. We have bulky glasses that are like the bulky cell phones, and what we really want are the iPhones of glasses. And Apple has been working on it, but so far they have not released it because it's not yet. But I think in 5,000 days, I think we could have the first couple versions of the smart glasses that would be like the smartphone, that would begin to be this yet another big new platform that all kinds of great things can happen on.
太好了，我们讨论未来5000年之后、5000天之后的世界啊，非常重要的目的就我们的观众也来看您的这个分析啊，很重要的目的除了去了解对未来的预测之外，也是要寻找我们各自的机会在哪里。我想会有很多的年轻的创业者看到巨头的平台、巨头的公司的时候，都想我们已经没有机会了。而且您刚才说，平台会成为第四种存在，除了政府、非营利机构跟公司之外的第四种存在。但是我在您书里面看到个观点，说未来的平台会有新的平台出现，不管是您说的镜像世界也好，还是其他平台也好，这个胜利很有可能不是属于 GAFA， 不是属于 Google、Amazon、Apple 和 Facebook， 不是属于这些传统意义上的这些平台。这个听到我相信就会让我和我们的一些观众朋友们就很兴奋了。是，如果不是属于他们，那会属于谁？以及我们的机会到底在哪里？
In 13 years from now, the most dominant, here's my prediction. I'm making for the first time. Here's my prediction. In 5,000 days, the most dominant technological company will be a company that does not exist today.
Wow.
Okay, does not exist. And we've seen how a company that did not exist just a few years ago, OpenAI, has completely disrupted the monopoly of Google and Microsoft, Bing and Google, and that didn't even exist. It was off to the side. It was not the major player, and that's very much the way it usually happens. The big monopolists are very fragile in terms of disruption. They're very temporary. And so I think that in 5,000 days, that dominant one will barely even exist today, but it'll take that long for them to figure out and become dominant. But it's not going to be Google or Facebook. I mean, it may be that Facebook may not even exist in 5,000 days. That's very possible.
哇，感谢啊，这个 Kevin 在直播间给大家做出了他的一个非常重要的预测啊，这预测听上去让人激动人心。就是13年之后、5000天之后，那可能会统治市场的科技公司今天还不存在，但是我相信也让扎克伯格心里面会很难受啊，他的公司也可能在13年之后也不存在了。那么，如果我们的观众不管在中国还是在美国，想有机会吧，至少有机会成为13年、5000天之后能够统治科技世界的这个平台的话，他们身上需要具备一些什么样的特质？他需要在今天做些什么样的事情，会成为那个平台呢？
Right. So the established companies want to become dominant. I mean, the startup companies want to become dominant. So what should they do? Well, in some senses, I mean, that's just the standard playbook. That's what every VC in the world is trying to teach. They're trying to take these young startups and they want to become the dominant player. They want to grow fast. They want to do all the things. That's sort of a well-established progression. It's that kind of growth. If you're asking the question of like, well, where or what's the platform going to be? As I said, I think for me, my hunch is that it's the metaverse, the mirror world platform. And is it going to be the hardware maker? I doubt it. very rarely, although Apple did very well in selling the phones. So maybe it's the company that makes the smart glasses and they make the whole system. That's very, very possible. It could be the company that runs the data and the software that actually makes the world. That's also possible because that's closer to what Google and Baidu does. And, you know, there's always a chance that it could be something like an Alibaba that's actually going to run the commerce on it. That's actually, they somehow, you know, own it. They somehow are the instrumental one. So maybe it's like a Shopify or something like that, that is able to kind of make that bridge and have the network effects. So I don't really have a good sense or a prediction about what part of that whole ecosystem would come to dominate. I suspect that we'll be surprised. And it also will depend tremendously on the execution of the actual, you know, the actual company, how it's run. So I don't think here's what I would say. I don't think there's anything inevitable about this. I think this is very contingent on having the right people, the right money, to be very lucky. So I think there's going to be a lot of luck and chance involved in who actually is able to take control or to monopolize that platform. So these things are not inevitable at all.
对，要成为那个最优秀的科技公司，一定有很多不确定性的因素啊，有很多的运气在里面啊。但是在哪儿会产生一家这样的公司？刚才凯文你说，元宇宙还有镜像世界这个领域，我也知道一直是凯文你非常关注的，也一直在讲说这个领域非常重要，非常重要。但是伊隆马斯克也讲过，说今天谁会把那么大的一个眼镜啪戴在脸上？那很重嘛。当然，我也相信技术会进步啊，有一天会变得非常的轻便。但是那个镜像世界，那个元宇宙，它真的会有那么大的未来吗？您如此坚信它是那个未来，甚至诞生统治未来科技世界的那个最大的公司，这个未来的原因是什么？为什么您如此看好这个领域呢
？And to clarify, what I mean by the metaverse is not a virtual reality where you close off and you have an alternative world, but you have a world in which you take a digital layer and overlay that over the real world with see-through glasses that you see through, and you have an additional digital overlay into the real world. That's what it is. So it's not like dark, it's not Ready Player One where you are closing off and in an alternative world. That is a subset. The same glasses can do that just by making them go black, but that's just a subset of the bigger metaverse, meta world, mirror world. And I think that's where it's going, because it's so powerful to do, and it is sort of what Google Earth has begun to do. GPS, we already have the beginnings of it, and there are enough people and companies working on it right now, more than other things, except for AI, that we can imagine it. And the third reason is, I think one of the reasons it has not happened till now, there's two reasons. One is we don't have the glasses. They're not good enough. They're too, as Elon says, they're too heavy and bulky. They have to be very, very lightweight. And this is very difficult to do technically. But the second reason is, in order to have this mirror world, this overlay of digital thing, we need to have AI everywhere. It can only happen if there is cheap, ubiquitous AI parsing the world, doing the understanding of it. You know, you have the glasses look out, they have cameras on them, they look out to see the world, and they have to understand the world like computer vision, which has to go back and be processed and then rendered. There is so much computation and AI needed that was not even possible before. And so what I'm saying is that AI will enable this platform to work. It'll be one of the chief things that we do with AI. We can only answer so many questions. We don't need a lot of AI to just answer people's questions. But we need a whole bunch of AI to run the metaverse and the mirror world, to figure out and understand and parse and render all those worlds in 3 dimensions in time. This is a huge job. And so I think that's where most of the AI will be going, and that's what it will enable for us. And so that's why I think it's going to be the next really big platform.
Yeah，我听下来最接近您的这个构想的，可能就是微软的这个产品叫 HoloLens。那您在书里面也提到了 HoloLens，就是它不是一个黑的眼镜，它是透过去，它不是一个虚拟的世界，它是一个增强了现实的世界。那加上这个东西之后，我们对真实世界的理解，然后去看到这个地方其实里面这个商店在卖什么商品这个人其实我以前认识等等这些东西，就会让我们变得更强大。我想您的这个非常坚定的确信会让很多在元宇宙的领域的创业者会有更大的信心那除了元宇宙，除了镜像世界之外，您在书里面做了很多有趣的预测。那我看到了几条那我想这个可能对很多的创业者也有启发。一个呢是您提到银行功能的虚拟化，实体的银行会逐渐的被像亚马逊这样的公司取而代之。但是真的会被亚马逊取代吗？还是您只是举了个例子因为在1995年的时候 Bill Gates 也做过一个预测，他认为未来我们再也不需要银行了，我们只需要银行服务。但到今天已经将近快30年过去了，银行依然存在。所以银行真的不需要了吗？亚马逊能取代银行吗？那我们的观众中间也有很多是银行的从业者、金融的从业者，您能说说你的观点吗？
Yeah, it is true that this has been predicted for a very long time. So banks are curious things. Is a bank the building, or is the bank in the people of it? Is the bank, what is a bank in the end? And there's no question that we need banking. Everybody would agree with that. Banking is not going to go away. You have to have banking. The question is, and so therefore, if there's banking, I think it's going to be centralized for a very long time. As I mentioned before, you can have decentralized banking, and crypto is very much part of that. But again, there's inefficiencies and there's costs to having decentralized banking. A lot of people don't feel very secure. A lot of people don't want to have to back up and store their own money. They want to give that responsibility to a bank. It's hard to do a decentralized version because you often wind up having to do some of the banking functions yourselves. So I think a type of, we'll call it at least semi-centralized banking will continue for a very, very long time. And the question is, like, where does it happen? It does not need to have a brick and mortar headquarters, although some banks will, because we humans like to interact with other humans. But I think they're going to be relatively uncommon. But there certainly will be institutions or organizations or companies that will have financial services that you can store money in, and they will protect it and they will guarantee it. They will promise with government backing to get the money back. That function, I don't think will ever go away. There are so many other things that banks do besides store money. They lend money. They do mortgages. There's difference. And so the question is, will all that happen in one place, or will it be unbundled and happen in different places? And I think the answer is both. I think there will be a lot of banking kind of activity done in but for was one reason, a bank that does nothing but mortgages, a bank that does nothing but lend, a bank that does nothing but store your money. And then there'll be some kinds of things that will try to do lots of different functions, but they don't necessarily have to have a building. In fact, they could be co-ops. Again, we have banking co-ops. They're not new. We can have where people share resources. There could be something that's completely customer owned.
Mm-hmm.
Those are credit unions. We have those, and they can continue to expand in different dimensions. So I think when I was talking about banks disappearing, I was talking about the physical building, the banks as we know them. It's really ironic talking about the disappearance of the big things. My bank was First Republic. It had been around a long time. It was a very well-run bank. It was a huge institution, and it just disappeared. Okay, it's just gone. So just because you're big in the digital world doesn't mean you're not fragile. You're very, very fragile. And so banks will be able to disappear. And so banking the functions around banking will continue to grow. We will have many additional instruments, and crypto and blockchain is another financial instrument, but there'll be yet more and more ways in which you can derive products based on money. You can do things with sharing and collective sharing and all those kinds of things, even though some of those kinds of crowdsource funding type lending did not really work. I think it will never go away. I think there'll be other attempts to try and do it with more safeguards, with maybe more regulation or even more innovation. I don't know. But I think we're going to continue to see amazing innovations in the finance world, because money is just a kind of a type of information.
Yeah.
And we're going to be able to do things with that we've never been able to do before.
Yeah. 其实非常同意，钱呢，它就是一种信息啊，钱就是信息的某一种形式。所以，既然信息能够通过互联网来达成，那么钱或者说金融，它理论上也可以通过互联网来达成，它其实本质是一样的。但是确实这么几十年来，我们一直在说它要被取代，但是到今天为止依然没有被取代，反而试图取代他们的一些机构出了不少的问题。当然也有些银行出问题，就像您刚才说的那个共和银行出了一些问题，硅谷银行出了一些问题。但是作为挑战者，在中国我不知道您知不知道，或者我在书里面也看到，就是您的这本书叫《5000天后的世界》，里面也提到在中国 P2P 这种金融的形式疯狂的发展一段时间，但是呢遇到了前所未有的挑战。很多的创始人跑路了，被抓了，成为一个巨大的金融风险。所以这种挑战者其实遇到的风险的状态，其实又进一步激发了传统银行对自己的信心。但是您在书里面却依然说，在金融领域 P2P 的模式一定会有光明的未来。那在遇到了这么大的挑战的情况之下，为什么您会依然坚信 P2P 依然有光明的未来呢？这个背后的思考是怎样的？因为您的观点，您是一个著名的未来学家，您可以跟大家分享一下。
Yeah, I believe that it's a possibility. I believe that possibility can do in the same way when the internet there was an internet bust in around the year 2000, and there was something called WebVan.
Yeah,
and there was a lot of money invested into it, and it went bust. And people thought that was a signal that you could not have grocery delivery on the internet. But now we have Instacart. It's basically WebVan. It's back. It's 20 years or 30 years later, and they have to try it again. So there are lots of things that can be too early. And people will try that idea again, and they'll perfect it, and they'll do it better. So I think P2P lending is one of those things that was tried once and that will return later on improved. There'll be more safeguards, maybe more regulation, again, more other guardrails, and it'll be like, you know, the idea of selling groceries over the internet is a good idea. Okay, it just has to be executed right. And that's what I'm saying. That it's inevitable, but the execution is not. It's completely unpredictable. So I cannot predict when someone we're going to figure out the right team and be lucky with the right kind of money and the right technology. But the idea is so powerful, decentralized, lending to each other, that someone else is going to try it again for sure. I don't know when. I don't know if this one will succeed. I'm not predicting success. I'm just predicting that they'll try it.
Yes， 就像2000年的互联网，虽然也泡沫破灭了，但是仅仅20年之后，互联网彻底改变了这个世界。P2P 虽然也遇到了问题，但是就像您在书里面说的，科技的功与过分别占51%和49%。每一个新的科技出来的时候，会带来一些先进的东西，但也会带来问题。但是带来这些问题，最终的解决办法是什么呢？您说的是用创造更多更好的科技，就是解决科技带来的问题的唯一的办法是用更新的科技、更好的科技，而不是把它静止在摇篮当中。这个我是读完之后把这句话把它抄下来了，这是也是我的一个信仰。所以您又提到了很多可能会改变世界的一些科技啊，比如现在都特别火的自动驾驶。您认为大概在2040年，自动驾驶可能会变成现实？可是我们现在的感觉是，自动驾驶似乎已经马上就要来了呀。今年是2022年，还有18年之后自动驾驶才会到来。您觉得这个科技是不是还没有准备好，还是有别的原因？
Yes, I do. I think it's still going to be 17 years away before it's mainstream. In San Francisco, just the other day, there are lots of Waymo cars driving around the streets of San Francisco, which are not easy to do, all by themselves. So we could say in some ways that that's already here, but it's not really mainstream. It's not really, there's still lots of problems. There's still training, there's still learning. It's not ubiquitous. And so I would say, and part of the reason is that just as the automobile was not a matter of swapping out automobiles for the horse carriages, you couldn't just take away the horses. You actually had to build a whole infrastructure around automobiles that was very different than the infrastructure for horses. You had to build ramps. You had to build highway drainage. You had to build traffic lights. There was an entire infrastructure that we used for this new transportation that was not just replacing the carriages with horses. And the same thing with this. It's not just a matter of taking the cars that have drivers and replacing them with driverless cars. We have to actually make a whole infrastructure change. We need to have new kinds of traffic lights that are easy, or signs that are much more dependably readable. We have to have intersections and other issues with pedestrians. So there's going to be a long process of managing this, where there's some auto-driven and some human-driven, and how we deal with that. What happens when a auto-driven car, a driverless car gets stuck? You know, it's those. It's so right now, the driverless cars can do 99.9% perfect. What we're dealing with is that 1.1% of the exceptions. And right now, like if a car was 99.9% safe, we're not going to accept that. That's not enough. We want 100%. We want 99. We want 6 nines. Okay. And it's those last remaining 9s that are the most difficult to overcome. And that's what we're going to spend the 17 years doing, is overcoming those last set of 9s to make sure that this works. And to do that, we have to have an infrastructural change, which will take a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of experiments to figure out what works.
Yeah，我记得就像您刚才说的啊，这个汽车取代马车的时候，我记得读过一个故事，说当时的马车协会做的调查，说汽车来了会不会取代我们啊？调查结果是不会，不会。为什么不会呢？因为汽车不安全，汽车跑那么快，然后汽车会把人给撞伤、撞死，对吧？我们马车多安全，马车不会出什么大事，就算摔伤了，最多摔伤而已，所以不会。但到今天，汽车早就取代了马车，那其实一定程度上说明啊，我们接受了汽车的不安全。因为每一年，今天全世界依然发生很多的车祸，但我们并没有因为这个原因而就让汽车不要上路，而停留在马车的时代。就算是99.9%的安全，有0.1%不可接受，但是它依然不能阻挡这个脚步。那这个您说的这个基础设施，这个问题其实我更感兴趣啊，因为今天关于自动驾驶，我所了解到有两个流派，一个流派的人是认为应该去研究单车智能。那什么叫单车智能呢？就是既然人能开一辆车，能把它开得很好，那我只要把这辆车上面的摄像头啊、那个人工智能啊、传感器啊研究得非常的好，那我就能在今天的道路上开好，我不需要去研究车路协同，就是车跟路那个路网的协同。有另外一个路线和流派的人认为说不，自动驾驶未来一定要去研究什么？一定要研究是跟红绿灯的协同，这辆车跟那辆车的协同。横过来的车跟竖过来车的协同，车跟路线的协同，去跟导航的地图的协同，它要研究大量的协同。所以这是两条今天的流派跟路线啊，一条是单车智能，一条是车和路的协同。所以在您的观点中间，您认为哪一条路才会导向我们的那个未来的真正的那个人工智能，在未来的5000天里面
I am very certain that it's the second. It's the system itself, and yes, a car alone with a lot of AI and cameras and sensors can get to 99.9%. But in order for us to extend those nines, then we need to have the whole system attended to, as you said, because again, just replacing that enough. What happens is that the system we have was optimized for human drivers. And if you don't have human drivers, there are lots of efficiencies that you can get in that new infrastructure, as well as other safety things. And so we're going to be in a period, though, where we'll be trying to do both at once, to have human drivers alongside of AI drivers. And that in many ways, that's the most difficult of all. It's actually easier to imagine a system that have only AI drivers. But the really hard problem is to have both at once. And unfortunately, we're going to have to go through that first before we get to the other side. And that's very, very problematic. And so so we may not see the reduction in fatalities and in accidents that we hope to see in the long term, because we're actually going to try and have both those things happening at the same time. And it's going to be what's the word I want? Frustrating at times. And it is again, it's not to get to 99.9%, which we can do right now. It's to get those other nines. And by the way, when you have the number of miles that we drive and are in cars and stuff, that even if it's just like 0.0001% of fatalities, when you have billions of miles being driven, that's still a lot. So even though that 9 is really down, there's still a lot of accidents that can happen even when you have 6 nines.
所以这个人和自动驾驶混行的这个阶段可能是不可避免的，我们就期待这个阶段能够尽快的结束，走向那个完全由 AI 驾驶的那个阶段。
Yes.
那时候会安全性会大大的提升。到那个阶段的时候，我在想象，可能路上今天我们所看到的很多的交通设施都不一样了，甚至连红绿灯理论上都不需要了，因为每一辆车都是联动的。我从东西向的车 和南北向的车是不需要靠这个红绿灯来指引的，可以在很短的间隙之内穿过去，而大大提高交通的效率。那个世界可能会是一个更加高效的一个交通时代，那个世界可能人类驾驶就变成了一个爱好，会变成一个体育活动啊，就像今天人类去骑马一样。今天已经人类不把马当成一个交通工具了啊，当成了一个爱好。那可能是一个美好的世界啊，但是也是一个很有趣的世界。那所有这个问题都是关于未来的。现在我想，您的书里面提到了一大段关于中国，这也是我特别关心的话题，也是我相信很多我们的直播间的中国朋友们特别关心的话题。您很关心中国，您也来了很多次中国，而且您在年轻的时候啊，也一直去环游整个世界啊，去了很多很多地方。您对中国里面有一个非常重要打动我的观点，是说您认为亚洲的时代即将到来，中国将会出现下一个苹果啊，这让我很激动。那么这个苹果会长什么样子？这个苹果为什么您认为会在中国出现？它会在哪个领域出现？什么样的人具备成为下一个苹果的这样的条件呢？
Oh, I wish I knew. Then I'll become a billionaire. Um, I think I could imagine. I can imagine something like I can imagine China designing, creating, manufacturing, and selling a really, really great electric car, whether it's auto driven or not, that the whole world wants. So like an Apple product that was conceived as a unit from the beginning of high design and the highest tech and affordability. So that would not surprise me, and particularly if there was an auto-driven car. And because one of the things I think that auto-driven car is going to become is a platform for VR. It'll become like a mobile office. It'll become a place where there's high bandwidth and it's a media cocoon. It's a media room. It's a Zoom room that moves around. And so making that really world class and for a very affordable price, something that everybody in the world wanted, would really, make can make a tremendous big successful company. And that seems to me entirely within the powers of China today. I mean, in terms of from where it goes from today. And the same thing with maybe some robotics, although we could also imagine Japan coming up with some very good consumer level robots, but I could also imagine that coming from China with the same kind of design orientation that the Apple products have, where it's not a Roomba that cleans, but maybe it's maybe it's something that cooks or washes dishes, or it's right now there's a race among robots to do warehouse robots. That's not consumer level, but that is a very big market, and it's something at entry level, which is to unload trucks and to load trucks and to move things in warehouses. But there could be a consumer level humanoids, the kinds of things that Elon Musk is trying to work on. A Chinese company, in my mind, could easily take that lead and really go for it in kind of the way that DJI has taken drones, right? I mean, they are the best drone company in the world, and they are really, really innovating there. So that's kind of an example of the type of company that you could imagine. It's just that now that's not just that, it's not that culturally important, but I think it's a good demonstration of the way in which you could operate.
了解，您刚才说到了好几个领域啊，像VR、AR 这个领域，就是镜像世界的这个领域，虚拟现实的这个领域，有可能在中国会诞生下一个苹果，因为它是一个新的巨大平台。你也提到了自动驾驶，自动驾驶其实在今天的中国已经有非常多优秀的公司了，这些公司已经把他们的车 除了在中国已经卖往全世界，所以这是有可能诞生下一个苹果的领域。那还有机器人，机器人也有可能现在我们的机器人还是在那个各个工业场景中间，一旦 to C 了，能够在个人用户用上，它也可能是诞生下一个苹果的领域。在中国诞生这些优秀的公司，刚才你也提到一家公司，也是我很喜欢一家公司，深圳的大疆。大疆的无人机其实已经做得非常的不错 ，DJI 做得非常不错。谈到了深圳的大疆，谈到了深圳我就想起来，您在书里面提到您很喜欢深圳这个城市，我其实也很喜欢深圳这个城市我现在在上海，那中国有几个很重要的一线城市北京、上海、深圳、杭州，当然还有很多其他优秀的城市。为什么您对深圳这个城市有这么大的兴趣呢？会很看好它，是因为它是一个有很多从全国各地移民到深圳的一个城市吗？
Yeah.
从很多其他城市到深圳移民这件事是人才争夺很重要的一个领域嘛？
I think you suggested a very good reason. I think one, in my own experience, traveling around the world, and not just China, but traveling around the world, Shenzhen is the youngest city there is, youngest by the age of the people in it, because basically nobody was born in Shenzhen. I mean, everybody has come there, and there is that immigrant energy, the immigrant experience of all people coming from all over, speaking different languages from what they speak at home, and mixing together. And I think that kind of vigor that you get from that melting pot, from that interaction, from that friction of interactions is very, very powerful. And that's one of the reasons. But what it has also operating is something that's very similar to Silicon Valley, but in a different arena, which is this ecosystem. So the reason why things will continue to be manufactured in China, in Shenzhen, is because it's not just one or two companies. It's not just Foxconn and stuff. There is an entire ecosystem, an entire meadow, entire rainforest of all the other suppliers and the people who supply them down many, many levels. The talent, the expertise, the ability, the tools, the facilities, the know-how that is needed to make something. And that's, and Silicon Valley has the same thing, but in the software area. So there's all these supports, and it's if a company collapses, you walk across the street and you get work for somebody else. And so that cluster of knowledge and expertise is the core thing that is needed to be world class these days. And so Hollywood is another one where if you want to do that kind of movies and cinema and television and all that kind of stuff, you move there because there's a whole ecosystem of all the people and all the skills that you need. And it's very hard to disrupt that and go somewhere else. And I can imagine these kind of clusters arising for some other things. Detroit for a very long time made cars. There could be a return to Detroit. There could be another place, Nanjing, Shanghai, somewhere, Chongqing in China, where electric cars. That's it. And there were like 5 or 6 different companies, and they were all together, and they made this ecosystem. But it could be robots. It could be healthcare. It could be health technology, biotechnology. These are all possibilities. And I like Shenzhen right now because it has one of those clusters. It has very migrant and youthful energy because the average age is so low, and they've come from all over parts of China. So it's I think it's it's a, even though the Beijing and Shanghai are more, what's the word, more prestigious, I think in many ways for me, Shenzhen is sort of like the Chinese city of the future. And wow. It is a brand new city too. That's the other great thing about it. Everything in it is brand new, from the opera house to the library, it's all brand new. So that's another great thing.
这是个很高的评价，深圳是 未来的城市，是城市的未来。但是您刚才说的那个集群这个事情啊，这就是城市这种组织形式的特点。当有越多的优秀人才来的时候，就会吸引更多的优秀人才；当有产业的上下游来的时候，就会吸引更多的产业上下游。这种集聚效应一旦形成，确实很难被打破。那会不会也因为这个原因，一个城市它就注定变得越来越大，越来越大，越来越大，而没有获得优势的城市就会变得越来越小，越来越小？所以我看到您在书里面举了一个数据啊，就是这本《5000天后的世界》啊，里面举了一个数据，这数据会说，今天的城市人口占全世界人口的50%。您认为这个数据未来会更大，会占到75%？说城市人口相对于其他的农村地区、郊区的人口在一半了，未来会到75，3/4。这个判断的原因是什么？如果产生了这个判断的话，书里面还提到一个让我脑洞大开的想象。那么您说未来的城市周围就会被农田所包围，就是附近都是农田，只中间是一个巨大的城市，会是这样吗？如果是这样，会在未来的5000天之内会发生？那我们是不是要做好点什么样的准备？
Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen in 5,000 days. I think that's generally the trend. I would say it's beginning to happen now, but that's nowhere near going to happen in 5,000 days, although that is the trend. And the trend meaning that more and more people are living in urban areas, the urbanization. And as they move into the urban, they're abandoning or leaving behind the rural areas. Fewer people are living in the countryside, and fewer of them are needed to grow the food. So that general trend of people leaving the farms to come live in the cities will continue in the next 5,000 days. But it's not going to get to the point where there's a city and then the green farmland right up to the city. That's far into the future. Although we see, again, examples here and there. San Francisco is a city that's very much like that, and partly it's accidental because it was a late city, and it was surrounded by military land that was protected from development, so it's now wild right outside the city. But for other places, it will take a long time to kind of come to that. But that general trend of increasing urbanization, decreasing rural areas that are becoming more mechanized and automated. And as AI enters and makes precision agriculture robot machines to do the picking of the fruit, the planting, or the weeding, all becomes robotized and automated, there'll be even fewer people needed to live in the countryside, and more of them will continue to live in the urban cities. And that is going to continue for the next 5,000 days.
对，我们正在开始了这个转变啊，但它不是5000天之内一定会发生，但是这是一个看上去的趋势，大家不断的向城市聚集，城市人口会越来越多，越来越多，越来越多。所以这本书里面讲到了很多我特别感兴趣的一些，我不能一一的列举啊，我再提到一些我特别感兴趣的点啊，与那个 Kevin 来探讨。您对中国很有研究，您讲到中国和美国的个人主义相比啊，东亚文化会更加注重社会的契约，这是一个非常有意思的视角啊。您怎么来解释，或者说在您心中的东亚文化，尤其中国人的社会契约和美国的您说的个人主义，它是什么样的关系，什么样的区别？它有各自有利弊吗？还是谁会更加好一点在未来？
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to fall into stereotypes when talking about these kinds of things, but it's certainly true that China historical societies, at least, are much more concerned about the social group over the rights and abilities of the individual, whereas America's is very much in the other direction, being very individualistic, rights over the social group. But what I'm observing about technologies and the new digital technologies is that they are enabling and increasing social interaction and collaboration. And so in that way, I think they could enable a Western country like the US to become more socialistic, to become more communal, to become more communitarian, whatever the word is that you want to use, the more collaborative and more, and to begin to reckon more about the power and the responsibilities and the duties and the privileges of a group collaborating, and not just a company, but other kinds of groups, maybe civic groups, maybe ad hoc nonprofit groups. At the same time, I think these technologies also can increase the power of the individual, and that may be what's working in China, where China becomes a little bit more individualistic because of the power of these tools and technologies to elevate the power of an individual to get something done. So I think both of them are kind of working, headed kind of towards the same direction. And it's cultural change is very slow. Nothing at all like the speed of digital world and technological world, which operates really, really fast, as we can see with AI. Cultural change is very slow. It takes a generation, human generations. So the kind of changes I'm suggesting, I don't think we'll even see like in this generation. It may be like the next generation who grew up with these tools from birth. And so but I do think that one of the things, at least for America, that we're seeing is that the ability to get something done in a collaborative way at scale, to empower groups to be able to, like a DAO, to be able to be a flat organization making choices and decisions, the ability of social media to connect, and the concerns that we have about the collective at the social media, all are suggest to me that there is a way in which we can dampen some of the individualism, the extreme individualism in in America, and temper it and make it a little bit more aimed at the social group.
我觉得这是个特别有趣的视角。你仔细想想，站在您作为未来学家，也是一个美国人的角度来看待中国，因为你对中国有很多的了解和研究。这个叫社交或者说社群，一个 group 一个 social group 这样的视角来看待中国，是一个非常有趣的视角。中国的家庭、中国的组织、中国的公司，甚至整个国家，某种意义上来说，在内部都是有一些社会的契约的，而这种社会契约把这一些个体连接成了一个更大的整体。这个更大的整体在一起，它能做的事情可能就会和一个又一个的单独的个人主义做的事情是不一样。很难说这两个东西是好和坏啊。我们今天其实不涉及这个好和坏的问题，而讨论它的这个区别。我们之间彼此的理解，其实就是来自于对差异的了解。然后呢，了解这差异之后，依然能够去理解它的出发点。这就是一个非常优秀的一个思考者。所以我非常感激您对中国的这个非常独特的视角。那我们从国家、从组织、从公司的角度，最后想回到个人啊，最后的最后还是要谈个体，还要谈每一个人。每一个人都要思考未来我要怎么办，在这个高速变化的时代，在这个高速变化的5000天里面。您在对未来的预测里面说到一句话，您认为未来老年人会比年轻人更容易生存，年轻人比老人更容易失业。这个和主流观点不一致，大家都认为年轻人会有未来，您认为年轻人比老人更容易失业啊？诶，年轻人肯定不同意啊。那您为什么会这么肯定呢？这是有什么样的思考在背后吗？
I think that must be a mistranslation, because I don't think I said that. And I certainly don't believe that. So I think there might be a mistranslation, either from English to Japanese or Japanese to Chinese there. Because I don't believe it. I think that I'm not worried about employment for anybody at any age. I think they will continue to be more opportunities for everyone because of technology, including no matter how old you are. In fact, I think it's quite the opposite, not in 5,000 days, but over the long term, the next 40, 50 years, as the population of the planet starts to decrease, we'll be hungry for people all the time. I think in the next 5,000 days, the thing that I would say is that the young people have no advantage over the old people because they think, this millennial generation, they think of themselves as a digital native, that they grew up with this, so they don't have to learn anything new. And what I'm saying is that they don't have any advantage over the old people because they're also going to have to learn everything new, just like the old people are. They're going to have to learn AI. They're going to have to learn how to use it, just like someone my age is going to have to learn how to use it. So they don't have a real advantage because everything's going to be new again. And that's maybe what I was trying to say.
Yeah. 其实不管年轻人还是老人啊，面对这个变化的世界，其实都是一样的，都是需要去全新的去学习的一些正在变化的新知识，去掌握的一些新的技能。
Right.
那在学习的过程当中啊，
Right.
可能会产生一些新的创新。创新是产生于边缘之处。那这个边缘之处创新，您提到一句话，这句话我特地把它写在我的小本子上面，叫做我们应该去更加积极的去失败，更加快速的失败。哎，这个为什么这么说呢？
This is actually one of the few places where there is something new in the world. There is a change in the default in culture. And I think Silicon Valley in California had a large part in this change that has spread through the US and it's beginning to spread in other parts of the world. And this change is very, very simple. And it is the change where the assumption is that failure was a disgrace. Failure was a disgrace, that you failed in a test, you failed in a marriage, you failed in a company, the company failed. These were all, until throughout history, considered a disgrace. And Silicon Valley understood that no, failure was an integral part of innovation and moving forward and progress. It was an integral part of science. It was an integral part of learning. It was an integral part of progress, that without constant manageable failure, you just didn't progress. And so there was a shift that began with the introduction of the scientific method, but was really kind of moved into the rest of the culture by Silicon Valley, which came to see that failing forward, failing with a purpose, failing as a means of learning, was not a disgrace. It was not a moral failure. It was a necessary phase to do through. You wanted to avoid it, but at the same time, you had to embrace it in order to get somewhere. So that's a big change. And that's something that I think China is still now having to absorb, which is the fact that if you start a company and lose a lot of money, this is not a disgrace as it would have been any time in the past. This is actually a necessary step for a founder to go through to learn something, and that the system itself expects a certain percentage, a very high percentage of the things to fail, and that's the expectation, and that's okay. That's part of what we want. And that if you are going to become a world-class sports player, you're going to try kicking, and a lot of those are going to fail, and that's not a disgrace. That's how you learn. So that's a big shift, and I think this idea of failure becoming a necessary ingredient for innovation and eventually for wealth is a new thing that is slowly starting to seep into other parts of the world and other cultures.
对，说的真的是太好了。就是前两天，伊隆马斯克 SpaceX 发射了一颗 航天飞机的模型，用那个重载的火箭，到了第二级火箭升空快要分离的时候，在空中嘣爆炸掉了。爆炸完之后，很多人在中国也看了那场直播啊。那整个 SpaceX 的那个指挥中心，大家都在哇，激动的不得了，在鼓掌。很多人就不理解，说它不是爆炸了吗？它爆炸了，它鼓什么掌呢？这不是失败了吗？失败了有什么好高兴的？但是您刚才给了个非常好的回答，因为失败它是进展的一个部分，而进展是成功的一个部分。想要获得成功，他就得不断的获得进展，而没有失败，怎么会有进展？只有积极的去争取快速的、便宜的失败，你才能一步一步、一步一步往前到成功。结果，失败不是那个结果，失败也不是目的，失败是进展的一个部分。我觉得这句话，我觉得是凯文能送给很多中国创业者非常好的一句话，能给大家很多的启发。那个人除了要有积极的去拥抱失败之外，还有一点就是要能够热爱自己正在做的事情。你也提到啊，热爱这件事情，因为热爱，工作和娱乐的界限可能会消失。我自己非常赞同啊，因为我是一个特别热爱我正在做的事情，所以我很难分清楚什么叫工作，什么叫娱乐。但是对于年轻人来说，以你的丰富的人生经验，大家怎么样才能找到自己的热爱的那件事儿呢？这个似乎是一个很难的话题。
It is very hard to do. And many young people, sometimes who have been told to find their passion, get paralyzed and can't get started because they don't know their passion. And they say, I can't give my 100% because I'm not passionate about it. And I don't know what my passion is. And they get stuck. And I think one of the ways out of that is to assume that you're not going to start with your passion, that your life will be a journey towards that passion and finding that passion, and that where you want to start, that it doesn't really matter where you start because that's not where you're going to end. So you assume that you're not starting at your passion, but where you want to start is in mastering something to become basically world class at something, whether it's accounting, whether it's retailing, whether it's mathematics, whether there's something, whether it's plumbing, whether it's car racing or car fixing. You want to master something, and that mastery gives you a platform to begin to creep or crawl or drift towards that which most invigorates you. So it's a stepping sideways, a stepping process where step by step you begin to explore it from not zero, but from mastering something, some skill that you have that's valuable, that permits you and gives you time and the ability to try stuff, whether it's a hobby or a side job or something that moves you towards your passion, that enables you to find your passion. So you can't wait for it, is what I'm saying. You can't wait for it to start. You need to start somewhere and then using that, move towards it through your life.
对，就是你真正热爱的那件事儿，它不会主动的向你走来。你站在这儿，你等着热爱的事儿掉到你头上，它是不会掉下来的。只有你走向它，你只有去走到你所热爱的那件事的身边去，但是你并不知道它在哪儿，所以因此你就需要去探索。从往左边走了一步，发现不对，再往右边走不对，一步一步一步，最终把地图打开，看到了一件让我觉得我的天哪，这是我这辈子愿意为之奉献的事情。所
And
以
if
他
you
必须
ask any successful person that you admire, if you look at their life, if you look at the map of their life, it's not a straight line. It's full of detours and right turns and setbacks and disasters and the unpredictable lucky accident. That's what it looks like. No matter who they are, all their paths look like that.
对的，没有人是在第一天知道就在那儿，他是不断的探索，终于有一天找到了自己。对所有的年轻人来说，我想这个重要的建议就是一定要尝试， 一定要动起来，一定要去做事情，你才能去有一天突然之间与你热爱的事情相遇。特别好。最后一个问题，那个 Kevin，这点也是关于个人。您对未来做了很多的一些预测之外，您也是一位非常智慧的长者啊，所以有很多给年轻人的建议。有一段说，您建议大家都要去试着体验一段没有钱的贫困的生活。现在的年轻人，我想，我不知道在美国怎么样啊，在中国，我想现在很多年轻人想，我已经够贫困了，我已经过得挺不容易了，你还要我再过贫困？我交完房租，我连吃顿好的都吃不上，对吧？你说的这个贫困的生活，指的是多么贫困才是你说的贫困的生活？
Uh-huh. Yeah. So this advice certainly may not apply to people who come from a desperately poor background because they already know this. But what the problem is that if people are lucky enough to not be poor, they don't understand. They can often be afraid of becoming poor again, and that prevents them from taking the kind of risk that they should take. So the idea is not necessarily that you want to be poor. It's not that. It's let me put it in a better way. What you want to do is you want to experience and rehearse what the worst thing that could happen to you might look like. The worst thing means what would failure look like? So if you decided to try something and you failed at it and you were left without something, you want to experience what that is. Now, if you were starting from something, you may know what that is and you don't need to try this, but for many people, they don't know what the worst is. And the whole point of it is that the worst that you could be at is probably not so bad. It's probably something that you could cope with. You may not like it, but you could probably endure it. You could probably get by. And that robs that fear of its power because you're living in it and you're saying, well, I could do this. And therefore, it robs its power to prevent you from taking the risk. So you can say, yeah, I'll take that. I could lose everything. I could lose my car. I could lose this. But I know how to live without the car. I know how to live eating just rice and beans. Okay, so I've done that. So I'm not afraid of that. If that's the worst, okay. Therefore, it gives you that power to take a risk, which is what you want to do. So it's rehearsing the worst of things, not necessarily just rehearsing poverty. It's like saying, what is the worst that could happen?
对，所以面对这个高速变化的世界，我们可能会遇到不确定性。面对不确定性呢，你要想获得你的成就，你可能需要去冒险。要去冒险的话呢，就有可能会失败。要失败呢，就可能会失去很多东西。所以，我们先去体验一下，先去尝试一下，先去演习一下。就是失去了一切的时候，你能不能接受？就是您说的这个，可能是贫困呐、或者最差的情况发生啊，去演习一下。如果能够接受的话，你可能才能真正的克服你内心的恐惧。只有把恐惧克服了，你才会不介意从一个地方到另外一个地方，从一个行业到另外一个行业，从一个既定的环境到一个全新的世界。而这种恐惧被克服完之后，内心才会有真正的自信，才会有对未来的这种充满自豪的这种探索的愿望。我觉得这也是可能是很多年轻人，不是说我上班下班其实挺辛苦了，我坐地铁，我都坐公共汽车了，我都走来了，我骑共享单车了，不是这样，而是你能不能接受最差的那个情况。特别好。所以，Kevin 特别感谢你今天花的2个小时时间，我们探讨了未来5000天之后的世界，很多的内容来自于这本书5000天之后的世界，我是认认真真把这本书读完，记了很多的笔记啊，还有我们今天没有讨论到的内容，在这本书里面也有很多的一些探讨。除了探讨未来5000天之后的世界，我们也探讨了中国和美国国家与国家、人与人之间、文化与文化之间的一些差异，也探讨了对个人的很多的建议，尤其给年轻人很多的建议。作为一位非常智慧的长者，我特别感激您的这2个小时的时间。但是在最后，如果您还有一些特别想对中国的年轻人说的话，你有一些什么特别想说的话呢？
Yes. First of all, I wanted to thank Rumi. I wanted to thank you all for inviting me and having this opportunity to share with you some ideas. I genuinely miss going to China. I miss my time there, and I feel like I don't really know what's going on, but someday I'll be back, and I would look forward to that. In the meantime, I'm hoping that this book will help invigorate and inspire young people to try something that might fail, and to try to learn from those mistakes, but to really realize, and I hope this is part of the main message of the 5,000 days, is that you are not late. This has just begun. This is the beginning. This is still the dawn. This is still the first day. There's plenty of opportunity in the world yet, and the biggest opportunities are bigger than whatever has happened so far. Okay, so you have more opportunity now than all the big Baidus and Alibabas in the world. The things that are going to happen are going to be even bigger. And so I think there's just, you should have great excitement and optimism about what is coming, and you have great opportunities. So I hope that you realize that and move in that direction. And finally, I want to thank everybody here for hosting me. I want to thank the two fantastic interpreters who did a great job in translating both of us back and forth. Thank you. You're invisible, but you were really important. And all the other people behind the scenes who have made this possible, I really appreciate your work and attention to this book.
好的，非常感谢啊！年轻人永远都有更大的机会，所以去做一些有可能失败的事情吧。感谢凯文今天的时间，也感谢所有镜头面前在观看直播的同学们。祝愿大家都能在未来的5000天去尝试，最终拥有你想要的那个未来。好，谢谢。好的，好，直播间的